What was the United States' first nuclear war plan? For the first time, the National Archives and Records Administration released a detailed declassified list of the United States' targets in the event of a nuclear war, showing a number of targets in Russia, Eastern Europe, and China. The declassified war plan from Strategic Air Command, also known as SAC, includes targets slated for total systematic destruction in major cities including Moscow, Berlin, and Beijing. Over the next 10 minutes, you'll witness how the United States planned to drop over 1,100 thermonuclear and atomic bombs on its enemies, in the hopes of winning an early victory in a hypothetical World War III scenario. If actually carried out, an estimated 100 million casualties would occur over a period of 2 days. To deliver nuclear weapons to targets, SAC would use gravity bombs, delivered by air-based strategic bombers. For bomber delivery systems, U.S. war planners would use B-47s, based in the United Kingdom, Morocco, and Spain, and intercontinental B-52s deployed in the continental U.S. By 1956, the U.S. Air Force had 28 wings of B-47 bombers, and they were the first in line of America's strategic nuclear deterrent. B-47s were often set up on 1/3 alert, with a third of operational aircraft available sitting on hard stands or on an alert ramp adjacent to the runway, loaded with both fuel and high-yield thermonuclear weapons, coupled with highly experienced flight crews on standby, ready to attack the USSR on short notice. Crews are trained to perform minimal interval takeoffs, one bomber following another in the air at intervals of 15 seconds to get the aircraft airborne as fast as possible. Minimal interval takeoffs could be hazardous, as bombers left wingtip vortices and general turbulence behind them. The first-generation turbojet engines, fitted with water injection systems, also created dense black smoke. In order to achieve the total destruction of the Soviet Sino bloc, the United States planned to use both atomic and high-yield thermonuclear weapons. Atomic bombs, like the ones developed at Los Alamos, rely on fission, the splitting of heavy nuclei into smaller ones, for their explosive power. In contrast to earlier atomic bombs, thermonuclear bombs, often called hydrogen bombs, rely on fusion instead. The explosive power of a thermonuclear bomb can be hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than atomic bombs. While the force of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were measured in kilotons or 1,000 tons of TNT, the force of a thermonuclear bomb is typically measured in megatons, or 1 million tons of TNT. The primary atomic weapon of choice was the Mark VI atomic bomb, with an explosive yield of 160 kilotons. The larger thermonuclear weapons planned for use were the Mark 15, Mark 27, and Mark 36 hydrogen bombs. Each thermonuclear weapon had massive explosive yields. The Mark 15 had an explosive yield of 4 megatons, the Mark 27, 2 megatons, and the Mark 36, 10 megatons. These compare with the size of U.S. nuclear tests in Operation Castle during 1954, where actual explosive yields ranged from 1.7 to 15 megatons. America's top priority target for destruction was Soviet air power, or USSR strategic bombers, due to the immediate threat they posed to the continental US and US forces in Europe and East Asia. According to US war planners at the time, the requirement to win the air battle was paramount to all other considerations, believing that a favorable decision could be reached in the initial stages of a global thermonuclear war. Military planners believed that it was of supreme importance to achieve the highest levels of damage possible. Accordingly, war planners wanted to be sure that enough firepower was launched to ensure 90% probability of destruction in the air power category. Soviet bloc air power was a complex targeting system before the USSR developed the atomic bomb, and therefore a significant capability to deliver nuclear weapons at long distances. America's top priority had been the destruction of the Soviet urban industrial complex, but during the mid-1950s, a greatly compressed time factor produced a reversal. As a result, air power targets included Air Force bases and missile facilities, government and military control centers, nuclear weapons storage sites, nuclear design and production complexes, and oil storage facilities. At the heart of the air power target system were bases for bombers, missiles, and air defenses. The first nuclear weapon target list listed alphabetically over 1,100 airfields, with a priority number assigned to each. The number 1 and number 2 priority bases on the list were in Belarus, Bykhiv, and Orsha, as were 4 others in the top 20: Baranovichi, Babrisk, Minsk, and Gomel. 7 of the top 20 airfields were in Ukraine: Pryaluki, Poltava, Zhytomyr, Stray, Melitopol, and Harel. 6 of the top targeted airfields were in Russia: Pachinik, Seycha, Ostrov, Selci, Spassky Darni, and Valzdishunka. One airfield, Tartu, number 13 on the list, was in Estonia. According to the SAC study, each airfield was one DGZ, or Designated Ground Zero. Some targets, however, appeared in the war plans of more than one command. For Strategic Air Command, some element of duplication was desirable and necessary. This was done to ensure the destruction of certain targets, in the event that one command couldn't destroy them. As a result, the duplications were confined to higher priority targets. Given the expansive definition of air power, this suggested that targets in major cities such as Moscow and St. Petersburg could be targeted with high-yield thermonuclear weapons due to the high number of targets in each area. For example, the city of Moscow had 12 air bases, 7 Air Force storage sites, 1 Air Force military control center, 1 government control center, aka the Kremlin, 4 guided missile facilities, 5 atomic energy research centers, 11 plane production facilities, 6 aircraft engine factories, 2 fuel plants, and 16 field storage areas, including refineries. Furthermore, Moscow had a variety of other non-air military objectives, such as Army military headquarters, Army and Navy military storage areas, and biological warfare research centers that might have been deemed worthy of attack at the opening of the war. The city of St. Petersburg was also a prime candidate for high-yield thermonuclear weapons. It had 12 air bases in the vicinity, as well as 1 bomber production center, 1 aircraft engine production facility, 2 atomic energy research centers, 2 guided missile facilities, 3 liquid fuel plants, 1 military control center, and 4 airplane storage facilities. In regards to China, whether if it was fighting on the Soviet side or not, U.S. war planners treated East Asia as part of the Soviet bloc and listed Chinese airfields and cities as high-priority targets, including the nation's capital of Beijing. Among the list of targets scheduled for systematic destruction, Beijing was in the top 20, with 23 designated target areas. The list included several air power targets, including 2 Air Force military control centers and 2 aircraft storage facilities. The location of these installations suggests that Beijing would have been targeted with thermonuclear weapons early in the war. For Beijing and the surrounding area of Fengtai, U.S. war planners identified numerous industry and military targets, including counter-value targets aimed solely at the Chinese civilian population. In regards to countries within the Warsaw Pact, U.S. war planners planned to use lower-yield atomic bombs against targets in Eastern Europe. Apparently, this was for political and psychological reasons, to differentiate those countries from the Soviet Union, through somewhat less destructive bombing. The only exception was air power targets. Because of the prime importance of that category, such targets in Eastern Europe were to be destroyed by high-yield thermonuclear weapons. For example, according to the SAC target list, Brig and Moldine airfields, located near Warsaw, were 31st and 80th in priority respectively. Tukul Airport in Budapest was listed as 125th, and therefore likely a target. As a result of high-yield thermonuclear explosions, the urban populations in Eastern Europe would be exposed to fallout and other effects of thermonuclear weapons, eroding much of the distinction between targets in that region and targets in the Soviet Union itself. East Germany was the site of major Soviet air bases, and East Berlin itself was a high-priority target for systematic destruction. Several airfields in East Berlin were in the top 200. Among them were Briesen, Templin, Oranienburg, Wetzel, and Wierneuchen. For example, Oranienburg, which was then a base for Soviet medium-range Bengal bombers, is only 22 miles north of Berlin. Templin, also a base for Bengal bombers, and later for Soviet fighter aircraft, is just 55 miles north of Berlin. Wierneuchen, a base for interceptors and fighter bombers, is about 22 miles northeast of Berlin. Presumably, those bases would have been targeted with high-yield thermonuclear weapons, which would have subjected Berlin and the surrounding area to tremendous danger, including radiation hazards. East Berlin had a priority ranking of 61 on the list of urban industrial areas slated for systematic destruction. U.S. war planners identified 91 targets in East Berlin and its suburbs, including power plant facilities, railroad yards, liquid fuel storage areas, machine production factories, and telecommunication centers. Additionally, East Berlin and its suburbs included counter-value targets aimed at civilians, as did Warsaw. As a result, the atomic bombing of East Berlin and its suburbs would have likely produced firestorms, along with other effects with disastrous implications for West Berlin. Whether U.S. war planners conducted studies on the vulnerability of West Berlin in regards to the effect of thermonuclear attacks on East Berlin or other East German targets is unknown. If fighting continued once the air power battle was over, the second phase of the war was to be the systematic destruction of the Soviet bloc war-making potential. The final blows in the bombing campaign would strike basic industries, those industries and economic activities which most contributed to the war-making capability of the USSR. To achieve this, the United States would drop lower-yield atomic bombs instead of higher-yield hydrogen bombs on designated urban industrial targets. The Mark VI atomic bomb, with an explosive yield of 116 kilotons, over 10 times the yield of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, would be used in the systematic destruction portion of the attack. The explosive yield of the Mark VI atomic bomb well overexceeded the requirements of destroying their designated targets. Moscow, the #1 urban target, had around 180 targets slated for systematic destruction, somewhere in the air power category, but many involved a variety of industrial activities, including factories producing machine tools, oil extraction equipment, and the most vital medicine at the time, penicillin. Other targets included significant infrastructural functions, such as electric power grids, railroad yards, and transportation infrastructure. US war planners might not have targeted each installation with a single bomb, but instead would have used the concept of target islands, whereby the adjacent installations were targeted at a central aiming point. Although the systematic destruction category would be struck with atomic weapons only. That probably didn't make much of a difference for cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, which had numerous air power targets, along with the surrounding population, which may have already been destroyed with thermonuclear weapons. This planning occurred years before US defense officials decided that there should be a withhold option to spare Moscow, leaving someone to negotiate with. The greatly compressed time factor, the danger of a speedy Soviet attack and counterattack, encouraged targeters to require the surface bursting of high-yield thermonuclear weapons. According to US war planners, air bursts would result in a decreased blast effect. Detonating the weapon on or close to the ground would maximize blast effects, and not only destroy the target and disperse irradiated particles descending far and near.